Okay, we're fixing to do a trigger job on a Handi-Rifle. The one we're using, this one happens to be my 22-250. Coming from the factory, the trigger job is horrendous, and I guess that's a good word for it. These little H&Rs. Well, this one's actually an NEF, New England. I have a H&R right there. That's my 204, and it's got a 14-ounce trigger. I got a real good scope on it. All my box of reloads. This one has a cheap scope from Walmart. It's sighted in at 100 yards. I'm shooting some custom loads on it, but it's good to plink around with and fun to shoot. You can hunt with it. It's shooting, I'm using Superformance powder in it with some Hornady VMAX bullets. I'd wait till I got a better scope on it before I, really try to do a lot with it. This scope is lacking, to say the least. My Savage 22-250 there, right there with all my reload and stuff. That's the one. That's my tack driver. I love that one. That one has actually got matching scope to my 204. They have twin scopes. Anyway, so I had some people really interested in doing a trigger job on the little Handi-Rifle. So that's what we're going to do. The trigger job on this one has already been done. And the reason I'm choosing this gun to do this video with is because it actually it needs to go a little bit more. So my 204, like I said, is 14 ounces. I'm not touching it. So we're going to try this one. So let me get the camera set up on the tripod, and then we will start taking it apart. I'm not going to video me taking the bipod and the forearm off. Surely, if you can't do that, then you're probably not going to be able to do the trigger job. So I'm going to get the gun back apart, or get the gun down to just a receiver, and then we'll start the film back up and then go from there. Okay, here we are. We got the gun apart, as you can see. You take the forearm off of the gun, and then just open it. Open it, and the barrel just comes right off. That's the only thing holding it on is that forearm. So what we're going to do, we can see, like I said, this trigger job has already been done. First off, we're going to go over a little bit of stuff that has to happen in order for the trigger to actually hit the fire, to make the gun fire. And then that way when we're going through some of this, it won't all seem so Greek to you. You can take it here. Don't dry fire it. I don't know, against my religion. But you can hold it here and see. I mean, it's really light. I'm just barely, that's probably a pound and a half, maybe 2 pounds, at the most 2 pounds. But you can see I'm just barely. But what has to happen, you'll see this, something to point with. This tumbler right here, it's loose. You can see, let me see if I can get the camera to focus. Yeah, that's loose. That's loose going in. You're not going to tighten it up. You don't want it tightened up. But that piece has to function in order for the hammer. When the hammer falls, it has to hit that tumbler for the firing pin to come out. When you let off the trigger, whoop, firing pin goes away. Now, if you shoot it, if you've got it cocked, all right, so we pull the trigger and we release the hammer, and we'll see how this works. Try to get the camera to work. So we pull the trigger, we got the hammer released. Now look, I'm going to get off of the trigger. See that barrel, that tumbler is going down. That tumbler's not there anymore. So there's nothing there to hit that firing pin. See what? Nothing. Firing pin never came out. Go through it again. You see the tumbler's up. I just pulled the trigger. I'm letting the hammer up, but my finger is off the trigger. See the tumbler going down? The tumbler's going down. it can't hit the firing pin. There's nothing coming out right there. That's a safety feature. So now, what's this? We're going to pull the trigger, and I'm going to keep my finger on the trigger. Trigger's coming down, the trigger's back, the hammer's coming down. See that tumbler? That tumbler is still up here. It's still here. It's still there, it's still there, it's still there. And then, there's the firing pin. But when you let off the trigger, the firing pin goes away, because when you let off the trigger, that tumbler goes down. And then nothing's hitting. The firing pin is actually that round piece right there. This has to be there in order to hit this, or for this to hit that, to hit the firing pin. All that does when you let off of it, or when you don't have your finger on the trigger, there's nothing in there. That piece comes down, so it can't fire. This piece right here is the piece responsible for that. This piece came out of this gun that we're working on right now. And the reason it's out is because I went a little too aggressive on this trigger job, and this was not reach. So when you were trying, you could jerk the trigger back real fast. This piece would go in and contact what it's supposed to contact and would hold that tumbler up. Well, when I got a little too aggressive, I changed the geometry in there. So when I would take advantage of my 1.5 pound trigger pull and just barely go until the hammer falls, the tumbler would not stay up there and it would misfire. It would simply just that. That's all it was doing, because this piece would not reach the device inside here, and I'll show it to you here in just a minute. So what I did was, I own an auto repair business, so I just kind of make things work. So I took this piece, scribed it onto a piece of rear brake, drum brake hardware, cut it out. It's a little bit thicker than this, but not by much. I cut it out, and I changed the little notch here. I changed its location, and this end that contacts the part that holds that tumbler up, I extended it just a few thousandths, enough to make it work. And now the gun will not misfire. It works like a champ. Actually killed some hogs with it since then. The gun works great. But we're fixing to start taking it apart, and then you'll see, you know, kind of how as we're going along, you'll see kind of what parts do what. I'll try to position this camera just so you'll know there is a lazy chocolate lab right there. And if that was not enough, here's another puppy. She's a little baby. Danny P. Danny, say hi. Good girl. Alright, let's show off my dogs. Let me see if we can get this to where it will stay on camera. Try to position it in front of me here. I'm sitting on the couch here in my man cave. These pins will only come out one way. You look on this side, you look real close, it's going to be hard to see. We're going to try with the light. You can see the splines. It's hard to see. There they are. You can see the splines. This side doesn't have the splines. So when you're holding the gun to your shoulder, the left hand side, that's the side to where all the pins are going to go out to the left side. Now don't let it scare you. We're not taking all those pins out. You can, and I've had to, but we don't have to right now. But what we want to do is, I've got a piece of board. I'll be right back. I'm going to lay this for now while we're doing this. There's actually a bullet hole, checking some penetration on some reloads that I was making. I wanted to see it penetrate, so it penetrated, and that's out of a 22-250. FYI. Alright, back to the subject. what you need is 2 punches, actually. And rather than me tell you one of the punches need to be little bitty and one of them needs to be not quite so small, I'm right here at my reload and stuff, so this punch, 0.100, that one, and then the other one that you'll needs to be 0.154 is good enough. Nothing has to be exact. And we're going to remember this. Before you even get started, there's 0.171 by, this one is 0.608 and it works great. So 0.608 by, there's 173, you know, something that this doesn't have to be precise either, but you will see why we need that in a minute. So if you need to write that down, do so. We can go with 0.170 and probably be fine. This one's kind of tapered, I'm sure. That's why we're getting a different reading every time. 172. So write that down. 0.172, 170 by 0.600. You're going to need that, and you'll see why upon reassembly. You don't have to have it, but sure makes life easier. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take the little punch first. I'm going to use that hole there to my advantage so I can drive the small pin, the one right above the front of the trigger guard. It's not going to be very, all you really want to do is break those splines loose. See, we broke the splines loose on the back side, and now it's going to come out really easily. And I just put my hand down here and catch it. Don't worry, nothing's going to jump naked. You got a pin. You got a spline, you can see. If the lights are going to cooperate with it. I'm in my living room, folks. See splines on one end, not splines on the other end. Set it up there. You can take that pin, take that punch out, you're good. You don't need it no more right now. Now we're going to take the other punch. You could probably use the same one, but we're driving out a bigger pin, so I use a bigger punch. So you can see here where our, now we're on this punch, on this pin. Took this one out. Now we're on the first one up above the trigger. First one directly above the trigger. You want to do the same thing. Take a little tap. All you want to do is break those splines loose on the other side, and then it loosens right up. Matter of fact, this one might have went all the way. No, it didn't. But I can almost pull it out with my fingers. Almost. There's a little bit of spring tension on this one. Don't let it scare you. Come on out with it. And that pin, when it pops out the other side, you're going to feel the trigger try to push away from the gun. See, now I got the pin out. This one you can see a little bit better, the splines. It's a little bigger. But I've got the pins out. You can see where all this is. Now there's some springs on here, but I'll show you better going back together with it rather than... We're going to take it out. And we're out. Here's the piece I made. If you remember, I was telling you about it a while ago. This is the piece I made. As opposed to the piece that was in it originally. As you can see this up here at the tip, I extended that a little bit. And the position, that little notch here, I clocked it just a few thousandths. But that's the piece that I had to reconstruct. As you can see, I had to extend it a little bit, because what I did on the trigger job, I got a little too aggressive and then that wouldn't reach anymore. So anyway, I have a part there. So this is the piece that we'll go back together with. Now the only other pin that we want to take out, you can take out this one if you want to. That one is what that tumbler pivots on. That tumbler that makes it hit the firing pin, it pivots on that pin right there. That's a two-piece assembly inside there. It's hard to see. Let me see if I can get a light on it up in there. Anyway, it's you'll be able to see it better when I get the let me get the rest of this out and you'll be able to see it a little better. Let me get that out of there. Now right here you can see there's a big spring over on the far side. I've got the gun upside down if you can see here. You can see the big spring over here. That's the spring that actually slams that hammer home when you pull the trigger. It's not a lot to it. All it's resting on right here is a little shelf. It's just resting on a little shelf, and it's actually pivoting. It's centered. Uh-oh, I kicked the camera. It pivots on the pin that we're fixing to take out. So, in order to keep the tension off of it, what we're going to do is I'm going to try to figure out how to hold this camera. Hold this light while we do that. Take you a little pocket screwdriver. That's what I use. And you just reach under that. And that's it. It just sprung. There's not a lot to it. That's it. So you just kind of pry it off of that shelf and let it do what it wants to do. And then we're going to take that pin out. I'm going slow. It's not really complicated. It's not rocket science. There are far more complicated triggers to work on. There are far less complicated ones to work on. I'm not a gunsmith. I own an auto repair business. I'm a mechanic. Have been most of my life. But I fix things. Alright, that pin, just as I got that pin out. There it is. So what we got to do now is the hammer. That is the hammer. That piece that just fell out was a spring. So what we got to do is take the hammer out. You just piddle with it, and just the thing about it is to take it apart slowly. Take it apart really slow and watch what you're taking apart. There's the spring that came out that we saw. That's what slams this hammer home. It rides on this shelf, and that little part right there pivots around that pin, sits right there on that little shoulder, and then when you pull the trigger, that spring, bang, sends it home. That's all there is to it. You might want to set things out a little more organized. I don't know, depends on, just how mechanically inclined you are. If this is something that's not, outside your expertise or something that you feel comfortable with, however you need to do it. I've done these so many times, I just throw them up there on the table and I'll get them when I get ready for them. Now, if you look up, there's some manuals you can read. I saw a place online, a 2-part PDF file you can download that tells you how to do this trigger job, but no video. It tells you to take this pin out too. And the only reason it wants you to take that one out is because it wants you to take some 1500 grit sandpaper or something like that and polish where it pivots. That's it. That's to make it turn a little easier. Well, I got news for you. When you pull the trigger, it's going to turn. You don't need to take that out and polish it because, like I said, it's a 2-piece assembly. When you take it out, things come apart. There's a separate spring in there that holds that tumbler. You can feel the tension on that tumbler. That's the spring that's attached to this pin. Leave that pin in, leave it alone. You don't need to take it out. I'm telling you, I've done too many triggers on these guns, and you don't need to take that out. You're taking 3 pins out. The smallest one on top of the front of the trigger guard, the one directly above the trigger, and the one directly above that. That's it. That holds your hammer and then your trigger. The trigger, and when we get all this out, you can see there's 2 springs, one on the front of the trigger and one up against that's going to go in here, you can see it, that's the one that actually gives you the tension on your trigger. Right now we're not worried about any of those springs. We're not ever going to worry about any of those springs until we start putting this back together. Here's where you got to pay attention. We're going to, this piece that I made fits on this trigger. There's a little pin. That's where it fits. That has to be positioned just like that. So what we're going to do, so we can see what we're doing, take the pin, the two bigger pins, they're both the same size. Take that pin out and splines up. Splines up. Push it through the trigger until it stops. It won't go through because of the splines. And put this just like this. And the reason we have to put this piece on there is because it serves as a spacer. It actually holds this, that space that you can see. It has to have that spacer there. And you'll see why, because here's what we're fixing to do. Now, you can, I don't worry about it. It's my gun. If I was doing this for some other people, and I do, I would take better care. But you can see I got some scratches on my gun. But you know what? It's my gun. I don't care. It's bought and paid for. I'm going to poke that pin through there. So now the trigger is in its position, only it's on the outside of the gun. I'm also going to take the hammer. I'm going to do the same thing with the hammer. Splines up, poke it through the hammer. You can tell how the hammer's supposed to sit in the gun. And all this fits on top of that. And you can see that you're going to have the hammer goes on last. Put the hammer on last. So we got the piece I made. Yours is going to look like this, but you can still see how it goes. You're going to have that hole in the middle. That's where the hammer goes. So make sure that piece, your safety mechanism, is behind that hole. Put this pin with the hammer through the hammer and put it in there. So here's what we got. We actually have now, the gun is cocked. The gun is in the cocked position, and you can tell that because of the position where the hammer is. Normally it would be up here if it were to be at rest. But we've got the gun cocked, the hammer's back, the trigger is locked on top of, or underneath, I'm sorry. The trigger is locked underneath. See if you can see the little mechanism, kinda. See if this will help. You can see right here, and you'll be able to see when you have this in your hand. You have to watch this video while you do this. Find a pointer again. Right here. You can see where that, you see there's a little lip. I mean, it's just, I guess there's just not no easier way to say it. There's just a lip there. You can see it real well there. That's what stops it. Now the reason that we're putting this together on the outside of the gun is so we can actually see how this works. Simulate the spring tension, push up on the hammer. If you push up on the hammer here, simulate some spring tension, and then watch what happens at that joint, right there where the shear is. When you pull the trigger, that pops down, boom, the hammer goes. Well, from the factory, that's a huge lip, and it is a square lip. By square, that means when those two surfaces mate, when those two, when the angle that's cut is where it mates with the trigger, with the angle of that piece on the trigger, it's just two flat surfaces pushing against each other. You know, basic physics are going to tell you that's going to be hard to overcome. So you just have to pull the trigger hard enough until it lets go from the factory. So what we want to do, and now keep in mind, folks, this is what I do. This is how I fix this. I'm not a gunsmith. I'm not saying this is going to work for you. This is what works for every one of them that I have done. So what I do Now here's where you can get you some 1000 grit sandpaper, and I recommend that. You can see that this is on the front of the trigger. At the trigger, I just picked it up out of there. And there's a shoulder. There's a shoulder there. That's the shoulder that actually contacts the mating surface on that hammer lip. But what you want to do is to make the trigger lighter. You want enough of it. You want it to be enough of a mating surface. I wish this camera was a little higher quality, because I know if I get too close, it's not going to focus. But you can see where those two surfaces mate. And you want that to be more of a ramp rather than two flat mating surfaces. I'm pushing pretty hard against it right now, and you can finally make it come off. But it's because I have it at such an angle. You get it back to the angle it is in the gun in a natural angle, and then oh boy, this camera. That's why I was hesitant to do these videos, because it's just not as it's not as clear. But you can see it's a ramp. The angle that I have it at is now a ramp rather than a flat surface, which logic will tell you that's going to be easier to overcome. And what you do is you just trial and error. You take it off. You take it off. You check it, and you put tension there. There's no way, you can't know exactly how much tension you're putting on this without some sort of measurable scale. I don't have that. Like I said, I do this. I do it until the trigger is an easy trigger pull, and I can shoot really tight groups with it. I'm not measuring stuff until the final product. I've measured the trigger on this one. I mean, on my 204, I don't even have a scale anymore. I don't know what happened to it. But on my 204, I measured a 14-ounce trigger. This one's slightly heavier. But you check it out here. You put a little tension up here on the hammer. I'm pushing up on the hammer, and then you just pull the trigger. And you can see how much force it takes to break it over. If you go too far, if you foul too much, the gun's not going to stay cocked. Now, it's not going to go off, because like I said, that piece right here has to, see, it moves with the trigger. I'm pulling the trigger. See, that piece is moving. Inside there's a piece up there, part of that little tumbler two-piece assembly, that piece has to contact in order. I can almost point to it right here. Almost. Anyway, there's a second little shoulder up here. I'm touching it right now with the pointer. Anyway, there's a second shoulder. We're not going to get into that. That's what that has to contact. And when you're putting it together and taking it apart, you can watch closely and see where all that hits. So what you do is you take it off, you check it here, boom. All right, it's a lot lighter now than it was. So what we do, I have a package of machine files. Got them for like $3 at an auto parts store. They got some that are rounded, some are flat, real fine, some are coarse. And I'm going to use this little triangle file, just because it's real fine, real fine. And what I'm going to do is, sometimes you have to do more of this by feel than by sight. You try to look and see the angle that is, and you want to work on it. I'm not putting hardly any pressure, a little bit. Blow that off, and then we're going to put it back. And see, you got to put the trigger in front of the hammer. See how the trigger's in front of it? Push forward on the bottom of the trigger. That's simulating some spring tension on that trigger. The spring tension will actually be right here when the gun's assembled, but the gun's not assembled, so we're going to simulate it by putting some spring tension on the back of the trigger. Then you can pull the hammer back and watch what happens as the gun cocks. See those two surfaces? They join. Now we're going to uncock it. I'm cocking the gun. I'm pushing forward on the bottom of the trigger, and you're going to pull back until it cocks. And it cocked. so you can see how that mechanism works. Once you see how the mechanism works, you can kind of get a better understanding of what you have to do to make it lighter. Now that the gun is cocked, I took a little bit off of that angle, and oh my goodness, that feels good. That feels real good. And I didn't take much off. There that is. Check it again. Boom. I would say, and I'm guessing, strictly guessing, I'm at a pound, maybe just under 1.5 pounds. I've lightened it up some from what it was. I'm putting a pretty good bit of pressure on the back of the hammer, but I'm not just making it unbearable. Simulating what I think would be spring pressure. Put your finger where you would normally pull it, and it feels great. It breaks over really nice. Try to make sure everything's flush up against the body. Oh yeah, that feels good. Yeah, that feels good. Once you get it like you like it, then you start the reassembly. I'm going to turn the camera off for a minute and take a pee break and rest my eyes a minute, and I'll come back and then we'll start putting the gun back together. Okay, well now we're going to start the reassembly once you're happy with it. And another thing I thought of, keep in mind that just because it feels a certain way out here does not mean that's going to be exactly how it is inside. Once you get it all back together, things line up. See, our pins that we're pivoting on, they don't bottom out, so they're not supported inside. They're just going through the hole in the outside of the frame, so there's some play here that will come into play. See how much that pin moves? Try to get everything pushed down solid, and then when you like it, you know, once you get it like you like it, then put it back together. Pay attention to what you're doing when you're putting it back together, because you get it in there and you may think, well, it needs to go a little more. Take it back apart and do it again. So we're going to start putting it back together now. So we take the hammer out, take that pin out, and then take all this back out.
We call this Buckle Bowski, guys, and he's been running around all year under the radar.
So what we're going to do first, the hammer goes back in first. As you remember, that's the order it all came out.
This deer's 4 years old.
So don't try to take the hammer out the top. Good Lord, don't try to take the hammer out the top. When you're coming apart with it, it comes out the bottom. If you try to take it out of the top, then you're going to get this little piece here that the spring catches on, that piece right there. You're going to get that hung up in the barrel release, and then you're going to have to take this pin out, which is going to take the firing pin out, and take this lever out, and take that whole mechanism out, just to get this out of the way. So don't ever try to take that out the top. Always comes out the bottom. When you're putting it back together, try not to let it fall all the way through. Try to hold the gun sideways rather than upside down. And I'm not going to tell you every angle that you have to turn it at. Get it to where it just goes through. You know, you can tell by looking where it's supposed to be. You know, you're going to get it in there, and ultimately what you're going to do is you got to line it up. Remember, these pins go in from the bottom when we're holding it like this because of where the splines are. If you can't remember, look at the holes. You can see the holes have spline. That's the other side from where we're working. That's the left side. Okay, we got the hammer kind of hard to tell by looking. You can kind of feel. We got it kind of where it's supposed to be. You can see you're going to be able to see the little tab, that little barrel. You can see in there. Now you can see the part that's moving. That's that little arm. That's that little, yeah, there you can see it there. That's the little arm where the spring is going to catch. I'm trying to do all this and hold a light. And, you know, we all know how that's going to work. So what we're going to do is this goes in the hole closest to the top of the gun. We're going to go in there first. And we're going to position that hammer until we got to make that, however you got to hold it. You know, use a little bit of sense there. You can look through. There we go. See, I got it where I'm holding now. I can see straight through that hole. This hole here. You can see straight through it. So what you want to do is come in from the back side, splines last, go through until you go through the hole in the hammer. And you're going to have to wiggle around and move it. Don't get any hammers. This is not a place where you want hammers. And we're going to go through until we just clear. You know, see it goes through the hammer. You can see it inside there moving. Well, don't go all the way through, because now is where the spring goes. You got to put the spring in. Without the spring, that hammer's not going to fall very hard, and you're going to be pretty pissed off about that. So you want to go in, if you can see how I'm going. I'm holding the gun upside down now. It's not going anywhere because I have the pin through it. I'm holding the gun upside down. This is where the trigger is. You can see in there where, you know, when you're doing it, it's going in like this. And it's going to go over. I really can't get the light to work any better. I really wish I could. I'm trying. I'm going to try to get the light to where it'll... I'm the smartest dog in the world. Maybe I could get him to hold the light. That's probably not going to work either. Maybe. Again, we're going in just like this. Where that pin goes through, you want the little tab here on the spring, this part of the spring. You'll see the part on the hammer where all that has to come into contact. You might not do it on this video, but because I can't get it to work. I can't get it to shine the light on there. Anyway, that little tab is going to push on that little piece on the side of the hammer. And then the main pin, this pin is going to just go through that great big hole. It's not going to be a tight fit. It just goes through that great big hole. So you get that in there and push that pin all the way through. And now I'm up to the splines. See, that spring won't come out. Remember, we pried it off a while ago. When we were coming apart with it, we pried that off. So what we're going to do now, if this were anybody else's gun, I'd be a lot more careful. But like I said, it's my gun. And we're going to tap this. We're done taking that out. You can put your finger over on the hole on the opposite side. Make sure that the spring is still moving. Make sure the hammer still moves, but don't try to cock it yet. Just make sure it's still free. Make sure it's not in a bind. Tap that in until you feel it poking through on the other side. You're good. You know, you can tell by looking. Go a little bit, just don't want to go too deep. That pin's in. Hammer's in place. Hammer's in place. The trigger spring, or the hammer spring, is not in place yet. But it's going to be. We got to make sure that you know, that's one reason why you don't want to start trying to cock it, because you'll get that spring out of there. You want the spring to be on the bottom side of the little pin on the on the hammer. And apparently while I was showing y'all what to do or what not to do, I did what I'm not supposed to do, and now it doesn't look like I can get that spring. Wait, here it comes. Okay, now I got it. You want that spring to be able to fall forward like that. The big part, the longer part, you want it to fall forward. And then you can see that it stays, make sure it stays on that peg on the hammer. And now we're going to just push it under there. Well, it went back over that barrel again. You got to hold this open. This barrel release, hold it up. It needs to be up, which would be down in this case, but you want it to be just like it would be when the gun is closed. You don't want that. You want it up like this. Don't let it down. You just kind of have to, by now when you're starting to get the hammer back in and stuff in the spring, now you want to just start holding your thumb under here. I've actually gotten a piece of wood before and wedged it in there to hold that up just to give me the third hand, but I about got the hang of it now. Got that up. We're going to turn that spring and make sure it contacts that little pin on the hammer. And just push that down until it falls under that shelf. Remember when we've taken it apart, it just sits on the shelf. See what we did? We'll take it apart and do it again. I just sprung that spring. Just don't get frustrated with it. Just you just want that to be on the outside of the pin on the hammer, because that's you'll be able to tell when you're how it works. You want this to push the hammer, you know, in the direction that it goes, and it can't unless it's on the right side of it. There, that's why I'm saying you want it to spring this way, and then when it falls this way, you're in good shape. And you can see where that little tab is in there. I wish we could get the light in there so you could see it, but we can't. Let me try. No, this camera's just not quite good enough. But you can kind of see where it's contacting the hammer up there. I know you can't on this video, but you'll be able to see it. But that's where it pushes the hammer. Or you got it on that side. Well, now you want to be able to, you just want to push this spring down until it pops under that shelf, just like it just did. And it's under there. It ain't going nowhere, you know. And as for right now, you can let the little barrel down, the release, you can let it down now for the time being. You know, start moving stuff around, you can kind of see what all moves what. I'm moving the barrel release now, and you can see it moving the locker under here. But you don't have to worry about any of that on this trigger job. You're not taking any of that off. Okay, this is where it's going to get exciting. Maybe we can do this and not lose my cool and say a bunch of bad words. We're going to try not to. I think this light is probably what's going to really piss me off more than anything. Let's see if we can figure out a way to... Maybe. I'm going to raise the camera up a little bit. Maybe that'll help.
After a morning of zero deer activity, it was starting to look like this father-daughter duo got up early for no reason. But just as they were beginning to think this hunt was a bust, a nice white tail starts making his way in. This isn't just any white tail. This would be the biggest buck Georgia Kate has ever shot.
Okay, maybe. Let's see how this is going to work. We got the hammer in. We got this done. So what we want to do now is start working on the trigger. Now the trigger part, you have everything. Some things have to go in order. Things have to happen at the same time.
My dad always takes us hunting.
You need,
around this time.
you need more hands than you have. That's what this does. Hey, that light on the camera itself.
Now, she hopes to do it again. But this time,
Duh.
she has an elite
Just uses light on the camera. And yeah, that shines it up in there. Now you can see where the spring is. Push the spring in, it's on its shelf. And you can see up in there where it's touching the little pin on the hammer. Anyway, you can see where all that is. So what we got now, set that down for a second. We're going to have our trigger. And that little notch goes on that pin. You really can't put this together the wrong way. It just won't work. And here's where the little pin, remember I told you in the beginning? This is where this is going to come into play. You're going to want to make one of those. I did. It sure made my life a lot easier. So now we've got a trigger assembly here. Remember, you got to have a spring up here. That's the spring for the barrel release up here. And you'll see when you put it together what that does. There's a little spring here. That's the trigger pressure. That's going to be putting pressure on the trigger. You can see where it contacts right here.
It's not going to be 20 seconds.
Don't be messing with those springs. I haven't done anything to those springs as far as releasing spring tension. I don't mess with any of that.
almost everything went right for this hunt. But unfortunately,
You got to get your little.
Georgia Kate to release her Carbon Express. The wind was so
All this has got. This is where I'm saying. This is where it gets kind of tedious.
all it takes is a few seconds.
You got to get that below that spring. You see where the spring contacts the trigger. You got to get it down there, and you got to line these holes up. That notch has to stay in that little peg,
Christian McPhail
or over that little peg rather.
is old man.
The hole has to line up between this
Clan and his
safety mechanism, the trigger,
busy pancaking
and the spring is going to be trying to push you off of all of that. That's where this comes in.
last season. Christian was hunting in
So what we're going to do is start
and strolled in. And
jiggling it around. That's what we call it down here, is jiggling it. We're going to jiggle it. You can turn it over and kind of see the hole. And you can get you a screwdriver, whatever it takes to jiggle it. Get it just right like you like it. And I'm pushing on the pin. We're trying to get this little pin to go in here. And it's arguing with me. Oh wait, look, it just went in. See, we got our spring is there. It's at a goofy angle, but what we're going to do, see how the spring popped up? Push that back down. See, it just pushed right down. We're in good shape. And we're going to, you have to push on it, fight that spring. The spring's not really hard, but when you're trying to do this and two hands and never done it before. Now look, the trigger assembly is put together.
sometimes it's just not.
Spring is in place.
There are countless does, but
Right here, spring is in place. You can pull the trigger, boom, 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 boom.
there are no shooters.
That pin that we made is not wider than those holes where it goes in. Right there and right there. It cannot be wider. That pin can't be so long that it sticks out on either side of this. It needs to stay hidden
Slope to the target.
inside there. It should be countersunk some.
1 year warranty. Don't believe it.
This piece will be on its peg. You can see that it can't move. What little bit it's moving right now is because this pin is not a precise dimension. It's just big enough to fit in there and hold it all together. And keep an eye on that little spring. I've noticed that when I've been doing this on a couple of them, that spring wants to poke out of there. You need it pointed, get it down there flush where it's pointing flat against that. Now it'll quit all that once we get it in the gun, because this will have some tension on it and it'll quit. But if I'm out here jacking with it like I am, see how it pops that spring back up? That spring's trying to push it up. So just kind of make sure that spring stays in place. Don't let it jump out of there. It won't really, I don't think, but just be mindful of it. Keep that one in place too. That's going to give you a blues here in just a minute. Now what we got to do, now you want to keep this up again. Hold that up. Like I said, I made me a piece of wood and I didn't bring it to the house. See if I can use an empty piece of brass. If we can wedge that in there, that would be awesome. But it's too round, of course not. Anyway, improvise, make it work somehow. So what we do, when we're moving this up and down, watch the barrel release. See the barrel release is moving? That front spring has to go behind that. So you got to pay close attention. That's got to be behind there. And see, this is why I said that pin can't be any longer than this is wide. It won't fit in there. You got to have that pin in place. That's what's holding all this together. Now you can do it without that, but you got to put it all up in there together as an assembly, loosely, without it falling apart. And then start working that pin in there. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to put it in there, and the pin that goes in there to hold it, we're going to use that pin that will force this pin out this side as it takes its place, and then there it'll be. But this little piece here, this piece has to go around that. And you'll see it kind of has to go that big loop right here. That pin, the other pin that we just drove in, that the hammer pivots on, that goes inside this little void area here. That's where that goes. And I'm gonna make sure. My little notch it's still in place. Thought that thing had a little bit too much play in it, but it doesn't. It's still in place. So what we're gonna do is hold the release up. Hold the release up. We're gonna loop that around that pin that we put through there, that the barrel pin, the hammer pivots on. And then we see our mating surface on our trigger here, and you can see the mating surface on the hammer where that surface mates. You gotta make sure that it's in front of, and the gun is sitting here, I'm saying in front of, but towards the barrel. You want it to be in front of that. So you're going to have basically that spot that we filed, that spot on the hammer that mates with that spot, the shear there on the trigger. You want that spot on the hammer to go between these two. You want it to go in this gap. You want it to go in that gap right there. And you want it to do it while you can't see it. You can't see in there. Once you get that hammer, or once you get that trigger assembly in place, you can't see that. But you can look through that hole and kind of see where our pin is. There, quit that. You can pull the trigger and see how it's moving, that mechanism. When you actually pull the trigger, see it moving? That will help. That big piece loops around the pin, and you pull that trigger. Once you get that trigger pulled where it will go between there, now you can feel that it almost goes into place. But what's holding us, just stay with me now, is that other spring. That other spring. It's holding us because, look at there. See it? It's on the, it needs to be behind this piece right here. That spring goes behind this. And all you can do is jack with it until you get it. Don't get mad. Be patient. can try going at different angles. That spring just fell out of the whole gun. Of course, we all know what springs do when they fall out. They vanish, but mine didn't. But you know, you got to make sure it's all the way back in the hole. An idea to do here that I've done before is wheel bearing grease. You can put it in there and a little bit and try to help that let that hold it in place. That might have been what was giving me the problems, is it was too far out. So we're going to start over. We got to pull the trigger a little bit to get it in front of, and remember again, in front of, by in front of I mean towards the barrel, in front of the little shear contact point on the hammer where you filed. But at the same time, I'm going to aim that spring behind that. Let's see if I can get it to move where you can see it. See the piece that's inside there moving? Yeah, see the piece moving inside? That's me raising and lowering the barrel release. I want that big spring right here. You can see the big spring right up front. I want it behind that. You want it behind that piece, but you want the trigger piece. See, oh, it just went right in. I push, you can feel the spring tension on that piece up front. But you pull the trigger and you can feel it slide into place. I got the trigger. See if we can look in here and see. I got the spring. Yeah, see, I got the spring behind the hammer, or behind the barrel release. That's where we want it. There's a, and you can kind of judge where it needs to be by the holes. See, the holes are not lined up. Everything needs to go a little bit forward. Well, and I just lost my spring location. But that's okay. That's what I'm saying. Just stay with me. Don't get frustrated. Just be patient with it. And you'll find the little spot, and it just went in. And see, now that'll stay up. And the reason it stays up is because this spring up here is pushing against the back of it. Now notice this is too far under. This needs to be on the outside of that. So we're going to go real, just a little bit, and pull that. The front of the trigger guard, we got to pull it down until the hole lines up. That's all you need to look at is the hole. The hole just lined up. We're going to poke the pin back through there. That's the front pin. That's the little pin that I just put in that's at the very front of the trigger guard. Front of the trigger guard. Verify, look under here in the front, verify that that spring is under that big flat shiny piece right there. That's the barrel release. That's the barrel release. That little half moon that we're seeing there, that's that spring that I just got through fighting with. So we can see that the spring is behind that, and this is how it needs to be. If you can see that whole spring sticking out from under here, start over. Get that spring behind this piece. That's what holds this up. Now I'm holding a little tension on this right here, and I can move the barrel release. See the barrel release? I'm pushing the barrel release up and down. You can see that spring is doing its job. It's holding it out. That's what locks the barrel down. So now all we have left, and you can see that shiny piece of pin that I made right there. That means all this is in place. That means it's all in place. Verify right quick before you do that. I got a little spring. You can feel the spring tension on the trigger. Now we're going to turn the gun over. I'm holding right here with my thumb. I'm holding that trigger in. There's not much tension on it. I'm like, look, I just got my knuckle on it. It's holding it. But you can see through the hole that pin that I have made. Now I'm on the spline side now. Turn the gun over. So you're going to poke the pin in. And what we want to do is drive my little, I call it a slave pin. Because it's doing the job I'm telling it to do, because I'm the boss and it's the slave. We're going to drive that out with this, or with the permanent pin. It's going to, now it's not going to be, like I said, it's not a perfect fit, but if you'll look, that pin just fell out on the ground. It's not a perfect fit, so we don't just get a hammer and start going nuts. Piddle with it. make sure you can still move the trigger. It's going through. I can still move the trigger. I can still move the barrel release. The hammer, I'm not cocking it yet because I don't have the pin all the way in place. But look on the other side and you can see up in the hole. Let me see if I can do it while you watch. We're going to drive that pin. Look at it, here it comes. Drive it in. Hold your thumb or something over on the other side. You can feel it come through. Just don't countersink this side. Keep it bulged out. By design, it's supposed to be out. And, you know, get them as close to even as that makes you happy. And then, remember the front pin, the little pin. Go ahead and do it too. I've done this one. I've had this one apart 4 or 5 times, and the splines are getting a little bit weak, so it goes in fairly easily. Now, the gun is back together. The gun is back together. And I can cock it. The gun stays cocked. That's what we want to make sure. The gun stays cocked. I'm not going to dry fire it. We're going to... Boom. It's just light, light, light. I wish I had a scale. I would show you on the scale what it is. I don't know what the trigger pull is, but I promise you, I can put tension on the trigger. There is absolutely there's no free play. The hammer's cocked. There's no free play whatsoever. There's no free play in the trigger. You pull a little bit of tension. I mean, I'm not putting much on it at all. And then it goes. If I'm pulling it like I was out actually shooting the gun, put my finger where I normally would on that trigger, and just simulate it. Just don't dry fire it. Wherever you put your finger on the trigger, wherever you're comfortable, I get just inside that first joint. Oh, it's light. Sweet. Now what you want to do is verify. We got our little tumbler in place. See, it's still loose just like it was to start with. What you want to do is make sure our little safety device, you can see it. See, alright, I released the trigger. I got my finger off the trigger. Watch that tumbler go down. See it going down? And watch, no firing pin. No firing pin protrusion at all. Now we're going to do it the other way. We're going to pull the trigger. I'm going to keep my finger on the trigger. Now watch. See that barrel staying up there, the tumbler staying up? Now watch the firing pin. Boom, here it comes. And then it just went away. So what we want to do is verify. Keep your finger on the trigger. You don't have to pull hard, just keep it there. And there it is. And then when it gets there, then you release the trigger and you can see how much tension it takes to hold that firing pin out. Nothing. Firing pin out, gone. Check it again. Pull it, finger off the trigger. No firing pin. No firing pin at all. And then if you like it, put the gun back together and go shoot it. If you don't, boy, it's light, light, light. Very light. Uh-oh, see, it just jumps right out of your hand. Very light trigger. This is probably £1.5 pounds. This one is my 204. This is my favorite trigger in the whole wide world. Verified it is empty. The gun is empty. And this one, I mean, see, that's just, see how, I wish you could tell how very little pressure I'm putting on this one. I mean, it's just there. To me, this one is the perfect trigger. Out of every gun I have, that is my favorite trigger right there. You know, and it just happens to be on one of the cheapest guns I've got. But that is the trigger to have. This one's not far from it now after what I just did. It's not much. Just a little bit. Very light. And then we're in good shape. Got it cocked. I'm knocking the hell out of the gun. You don't want the gun to shoot. The gun's not shooting. I'm knocking it. I'm hitting it hard. Gun won't shoot. Safe gun. Even if it did release, that safety mechanism, you see now how it works. If it did release for some reason and the hammer decided to fall, if I'm not touching that trigger, you're not getting a firing pin. So you're not getting a firing pin. No firing pin. So even if it did fall, it's not going to fire. Not without the trigger being pulled. From that point on, you get the barrel, hook it on the pin, verify that the gun will close. The gun will close and stay closed. It'll open.
This late season hunt in Illinois takes place in Hancock County, and in particularly I was after Samson, Hollywood, and the Shore G4 buck. These were the bucks that were mature, solid.
You can go so far as to bed these rifles. You can, my 204 has a tactical front stock on it off of it's an AR style. It is fully bedded. This one actually contacts the barrel. You can go through this. This just wood. I've refinished this one. I'm not doing it because I've refinished the stock and got it like I like it. It's a pretty gun. But you can go through and bed these guns. Take that, get that all the way around. The only part you can't do is this is where it bolts to the gun, and you really don't have any choice about that part. But you can get the rest of this to where it does not contact the barrel. So, you know, and that one, I've got another one, not this one. I've got another one that I actually have a piece of rubber here that's suspended in. It's suspended into that rubber, and the only part that contacts that is that screw through here, and it squishes down against that rubber. Now those black marks there are where my bipod was. I did not know that was like that, and I will fix that. Snug that up. Put the bipod back on there. I got these bipods, I believe. I got this one from Walmart. They're good bipods. I've got one just exact same bipod on that 204 over there. Most of the shooting we do is from a table in a rifle cradle, at which case I take these bipods off in the field.
We've got a good stream right here, a lot of fresh water. So we just get the tent set all back. We've got a lot of area we can grass right here. I mean, we got sheep, mountain caribou, mountain goats, you name it, they're all in this valley. So
the guns are awesome little guns. They're cheap made guns, great guns for kids to shoot. But you know, you get one and you get rid of heavy trigger. Oh, that's sweet. Nothing to it. I need to get a new thumb bar for this one so I can reach it. And get that cheap center point scope off of there. And put one of those sight marks on there. Sight mark is an awesome scope. That's from my 204, but you can see the tactical. Show you this kind of. I know this is a trigger job video. But you can do a little bit of accuracy video with it. You see, I got an AR style stock, fully bedded. The stock does not touch the barrel. I've got a Picatinny rail on the side here that I put my Laser Genetics ND3 for the night vision stuff. We do a lot of hog hunting and stuff at night with this gun and coyotes. Yes, I will shoot a hog with this gun and I will drop him in his tracks. I promise you. This is my 204 with those reloads. Got my reloads done. They're ready. My little twins. I love my guns. And I like this one too. This one's my tack driver. I'm shooting a .35 MOA with that one. 5 shots at 100 yards, making a pretty jagged edge 35 caliber hole. Same exact scope as the one on my 204. It's a sight mark. And you can see my man cave. I sit here and watch hunting shows. Reload. Here's my reloads for my. That's the ones that I'm shooting at 35 MOA with my 22-250. That's those. Dale, say hi. Want to say hi? You want to talk? You better wake your butt up too, girlfriend. Well, folks, I hope that helped you. I know there's a lot of you on Facebook, some of those reloading sites that were really wanting to know how to do this trigger job. And there you have it. That's what we just did, was a trigger job on a Handi-Rifle. This one happens to be New England Firearms. The H&R, Harrington and Richardson, the exact same gun. I don't even know why they ascribed a different name in it. Everything's the same. The only difference in these two guns is this 22-250 will actually eject the shell. It'll throw it over your shoulder. And the 204 won't. It just lifts it for you to pull out yourself. Maybe that's the difference in the two guns. I don't know. We've also got a 243, and it'll hit you in the face with it if you're not careful. So maybe that'll help you. If you have to, just keep watching this video. Go back over it. I hope I covered it as much depth as in as much detail as I could. Just remember, the only pins you take out are this little one and the first two above the trigger. Don't take these other ones out. You don't have to take those out. Just the little bitty one and the first two above the trigger, and that's it. A little trickier going back together than it is coming apart, but if you'll watch it when you're taking it apart, watch it carefully, you can do it. You can do it. I have never had anybody in my life show me how to do this. I just got me a punch and a hammer and some stuff, and I just started taking it apart and doing it until I got the trigger like I liked it. Once I did it on the first gun, that was the first one I ever did. Once I got it like that, I got the other ones, and I thought, you know what, it's too easy. So here we go. Good luck. If you have any problems, hit me up on Facebook. I'm easy to find. That's how you do it.